today, the topic of the conversation is art, religion, and self-expression. So what I wanted to talk about was get a few interesting Arab artists on the line to share, to give each other a platform for the work we do, what it means for you, if there's like a meaning behind your art, if you do your art because of identity reasons, or if it's a way to deal with internal colonialism or anything like that, then we can discuss that. And then I want to bring in the religious element. So obviously there's a debate. I will be clear. I'll make my views clear in the beginning, so you all know where I stand. I don't think art is haram, personally. I think that we have a long tradition in the Arab world of art. I'm sure that there will be some people that agree or disagree, and we can discuss that as well. So yeah. So I think one of the artists should go first to show it. Maybe Faiza, you can show us your pieces. I see some interesting work behind you.
Yeah, this is like, I did this, I think, last year. Yeah, I mean, since my mom is from Ghana and my dad is from Libya, it's funny that I don't paint like lots of Libyan identity, like more African. But I feel like art is like a journey. It's like sometimes you change. Sometimes you have different opinion about certain subject. So like, when I first started painting, it's more political because it was during the revolution and everyone was talking about the revolution and we were watching TV. So I started painting like political art. Then when the revolution finished, it's more like I started to have this quiet time with myself. So it's like trying to figure out who I am. It's not very political. But I continue to do the political because you can't you can't stay out of politics since it affects your life directly. Then I started doing portrait with like African women. It's at the same time exploring myself and introducing the African culture to the Libyan community. Like I have people in my work and friends, like when they see like a woman with a turban, they admire because they have no idea about how African, they don't have idea much about African culture and African clothes and food. Even when I say my mom is from Ghana, they're like, oh, it's Ghana is like green, it's all green. It's more than green. I mean, we have like rich culture and music and clothes. So it's more like an introduction. It's familiarizing the Libyan society with African culture. And yeah, I have like with comments, like religious comments, like it's not good you paint people, it's haram, try to avoid painting something that has like a soul and a spirit, like do more abstract. And you can see like I tried going back to abstract, but I am more portrait. I love painting people, and I love like looking at expression. Like when I talk to people, I always concentrate on their facial features. So I can't, and this is not something I believe in. I feel like painting faces is not haram. So that's like that's the religious aspect of my painting.
Hussam, do you, obviously you work in Al-Azhar, Dar al-Ifta', are you familiar with the kind of conversations and debates around this? I agree with Faiza. I think her art's really interesting and impressive. I like the Frida Kahlo plug as well. I can see that she's probably influenced you. We can talk about that as well. So yeah, Hussam, what do you think about like religiously and art and so forth? What's your views?
Well, thank you so much for the question. First of all, I don't work at Al-Azhar or at Dar al-Ifta'. I work at Al-Azhar Fatwa Global Center. And of course, I'm aware of all the debates surrounding this issue. But what I'd like to highlight here is even the debate itself, it's about like statues. And there is a point or there is a reason. So even when it comes to like pictures like this or drawings like this, so the prevailing opinion within the Islamic jurisprudence is permissibility. With that being said, another point that I'd like to stress here is the principle when it comes to Islamic jurisprudence and art. Definitely, it is permissible, and this is why we find all these artistic expressions all across the centuries produced and made by Muslims. So this is why even when they speak of the details, then they speak of the point behind an artistic work, but they never say that in principle, as we unfortunately witness the discourse or the stance coming from certain groups or entities that claim to be acting or representing the voice of Islam on this matter. So this is my point that many Muslim scholars like Al-Ghazali and others, they speak very highly of art and artistic expressions and the role of art when it comes to uh, promoting noble issues and noble objectives. So I don't fully endorse the idea that in principle that they are contradictory or any form of art that involves the facial expressions of a human being is permissible. It is quite the opposite, as a matter of fact.
I would also add, if I may, like that this I would argue that this arbitrary divide between art and religion, I really think it's an arbitrary divide, because if you look at religion and institutions that represents religions, everything about these institutions is artistic. You look at a mosque from outside, and the architecture of a mosque is a piece of art. You look at a church, you go into a cathedral, everything in that cathedral and in that church is artistic. The same thing in a synagogue. So like, I mean, the Quran itself, like looking at like the cover of it, the calligraphy is art. So and if we just look at one form of art, which is Arabic calligraphy, the history and the origins of it is Islamic. So I absolutely think that those comments on the divide between religion and art is extremely arbitrary, and I would not think I don't want to dismiss it, but there's something to be said about like how we create that divide, and pretending as if that the religion doesn't include art within its discourse. It definitely does, and it's expressed a lot of times. And I mean, like, so this, if you think of just Sufi, like the madhab of Sufi, the way that they chant, I mean, that's art. So yeah, that's what I think.
Why do you think so many people feel threatened by art? This is an open question to everyone.
Because there is lack of knowledge, and there is this I would use the word arbitrary, as Shaza has put it, to create or even to impose this dichotomy that Islam is inherently anti-social, anti-artistic, and this is why it is important to have the educated people to speak out not only on the grounds of their own personal experience or their own personal interpretations, but from a scholarly perspective, and basing their opinions or their stances on scholarly grounds. So this is why, as I mentioned, you find the principal stance when it comes to the very well-known Muslim scholars like Al-Ghazali and many others, and I can count so many when it comes to Al-Azhar, how they stand in support of art, and they stand in support of all forms of art, as I have mentioned earlier, that promote noble objectives and noble causes, and the realm is very wide open for this. So to answer more specifically the question, why is that there is this notion that religion or Islam per se is opposed to art? because there is so much lack of knowledge, and I would say that sometimes it is even systematic to make it like this is the overall, or this is the dominant stance, and this is why we need to speak up and to clarify things when it comes to this point and others related to them.
Oz, could I add quickly to what you just said?
Sure, and then Samah afterwards, after yourself, Sean. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to agree wholeheartedly and elaborate a little bit. I mean, I'll make my personal view very clear. It says, if I'm not mistaken, in the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God loves beauty, and it is indeed found everywhere in the religion. But to, yes, expand on his point, I think if art means, it's very hard to define art, but if it means free self-expression, if it means the abstract representation of truth, like these are things that are or can be very threatening to the ruling class. And I think politics and religion mix here. I mean, politics and religion and art are indeed intertwined, but politics and religion, that's another debate. And maybe this is an example of where politics can have a very harmful effect on religion. I think I would hazard that.
Really interesting point. We'll cover that in a second. Samah, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so the thing that I wanted to say that, like, first of all, the issue of like the restriction in art, I think it belongs to just some specific schools. It's not like it is Islam, like say this is they drawing this haram or not haram, because even in the Islamic history, like there is periods and times of the history where art is like is a nourished thing and develop things like Dawla al-Umayyah, Dawla al-Abbasiyah, all this in the Islam, like there is this Islamic art is not only just architecture things, there is also painting, portrait, and all these things. And answering your question, Osama, why people like in the culture fear art, I think I agree with Sean, because I think art, it challenges the beliefs that people have, and people, they don't have similar beliefs. And in our culture, in the Arab and the Middle Eastern culture, most people, like, they are not only concerned about themselves, they also, there is something in our society makes people want this person to do this, that person to do that, to intervene and to have some kind of control. Maybe sometimes it's from good intention, sometimes people are not very aware of what they are doing, sometimes they mean that they want to control and shape everything. So many people, we find, they feel like we don't want to do this. Also the political systems in our countries, if we look at them, most of them, they're not democratic, so they tend to also to clash with freedom of art. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I wanted to ask, after Lawrence's point, and hopefully Lawrence can introduce himself as well. Angie on the call, the other artist who are sharing her work now, she's from a Druze background. So I want to touch up upon if she faces similar kind of pushback in the Druze community or not, or if they're more tolerant of this kind of thing. But yeah, Lawrence, please go ahead, and then we'll discuss that with Angie.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name's Lawrence Joffe, and I worked with Osama for a few years. We're originally at the Arab Jewish Forum. That's where he did some work before. And so I know Osama and seen him in person. Shatha, hello. We've known each other for a few years as well, but just virtually. And Osama also, it's nice to see you in person. Moving images as well. So that's great. And everybody.
Likewise, Lawrence.
Thank you.
you.
And Samah too. Good to see you. Yeah, no, I just wanted to ask two or 3 points, if I may. And one is based on what Sean was saying, and I met Sean before as well. it suddenly occurred to me that the question is what's legitimate on the street, as it were. So, for instance, in society and politics, you could have, there's, in so many societies, depending on the background, there's still something of a fear of the individual artist. There's somebody, the named artist. And remember, the named artist is almost a new innovation in the West and even more so in other cultures. And yet art is acceptable, it seems, for promotion by advertising. There's no, so there seems to be a paradox that somebody is expressing themselves is seen as a threat, but somebody who's working for a mercantile interest in order to promote a good or product is suddenly outside the ideological plane. And then the other question, I mean, I had other comments about Judeo-Christian and Islamic traditions about art being, in a sense, the imitation of God, in the sense, maybe that's the fear of the artist, because I know in the Torah it says God created man in his own image. So if man then creates something else, whose image is he creating in? Is that, in the Islamic context, like shirk? Is that putting a division between God and his creation? And the third question really is, or observation, is that within what I know of the Islamic cultural traditions, you have such a variety. So on one hand, you might have Shia typography, which shows Ali and the imams, very graphic images, whereas the Saudi tradition, or Hanbali, they don't want any decoration at all. So there seems, in practice, there seems to be a great variety of expression or tolerance according to local traditions and observation. Sorry, I slightly overloaded things there, but just a few ideas I had.
Really, that's really interesting. That's really fascinating. Thanks, Lawrence, for that insight from the Quranic perspective. Angie, so in the Druze community, what's it like to be a Druze artist from your experience?
So the Druze community is kind of, for anybody who doesn't know, we're a religion that stemmed from Ismaili Shia Islam, but we're like not considered Muslim by most people, and many of us also don't consider ourselves Muslim. I can get to my personal views on that another time. But I find that culturally, like, so you know how, for example, in like general Islam, you might see somebody who's like, they might like cover or dress modestly, but then they still drink, or like somebody who doesn't cover, but they pray 5 times a day, things like that. There's kind of like a wide range of like how people practice within that. With the Druze community, because of how it's like a secret religion kind of, because of the persecution that happened so long ago, and they don't allow converts. So what ends up happening, from what I've seen, that we don't have as wide of a range of like how people practice. It's kind of like, it's like both extremes only. So you have people that are almost like they live with no religion whatsoever, aside from like the identity of being Druze, and so marrying another Druze, like that's like kind of like the only thing they'll care about. But then like drink and whatever. And then you have like, the people who are mega religious and, sheikhs and sheikhas and things like that. So I find that when it comes to, because like, and most people, like, they're not that religious, especially like, because they don't want to be seen as Muslim. And I live in, in the States, in the United States. So because there's so much like anti-Muslim, whatever, they go as far away from that as possible. So I find that for the average Druze person, they kind of like, oh, you do art, cool. And then for the more religious ones, it's kind of the same as like, oh, like you can't do this, especially with things like dancing, where, especially as a woman, like I'm an aspiring dancer, and like that same idea of like, oh, you're in control of your body and dancing publicly, like that means you're sexually available. So there's that same, like those same mindsets. But regarding my visual art, I haven't gotten that much heat from my community. Granted, like I'm not that involved because I don't follow, like I'm not like Druze, just from other personal issues I have with the community. I also wanted to touch on the question you asked about kind of like why people might like fear art or things like that. And I feel like a big part of that is because art to me is a type of language. And oftentimes when people are around a language that they don't speak, they get kind of like defensive and scared. And art is no different. Like, this is a visual language that a lot of people don't understand, or they have these like predispositions to it for whatever reason, and it kind of makes them like defensive. And then also when I think of the average artist, I feel like we tend to be critical, not in a bad way, but we just sort of like analyze things a lot. I find that we're generally more open to trying to like interact with different demographics a lot, just because a lot of art is like trying to make connections. And so I feel like people fear art sometimes because they fear artists. We tend to have also just like, we believe in like autonomy over our bodies, our work. And that also develops a certain kind of confidence in us that I feel like in general people don't like in others. Like, people don't like a lot of the time people who are in, you know, confident and in control of themselves, whether it's through the visual art or their bodies, if they're into movement kinds of things.
I'd also like to add like 2 points, reiterating what Angie just said. In my experience with the Orientalizing art, I tried to take like the artist's artwork, like Faiza's work that I have, and I was hoping that I would use it to spark dialogue in the religious community, and religious not in the sense that they are religious, but just like within. And so like I took it to churches, then they accepted that I would show the artwork in the church and then have people come and we can talk about it. But in the mosques, it was not. They rejected my proposal to put the artwork in the mosque. Part of these conversations is that a mosque is a place of worship, and therefore cannot be used for that space. And so, like whenever I have that type of conversation, my response is often, but it's called al-jama'. And in historically, that word actually means it's a space for community to get together, and therefore we should be able to talk about art in that community. But it's not that I still get rejected. I mean, this is like mosques in California, so I don't know how that would be. And the other point that I would like to also make is that I think there is a sense of like we need to create. And this is something I think, Angie, you touched a little bit on, is like fear, and like being kind of pushed outside of the comfort zone. And that's like there seems to be a need to establish a me versus them type of dynamic. And so I don't know, at least from my observation, art and talking about art publicly and expressing it publicly is a Western thing, and like we're more culturally we're more like private, and like if you're expressing yourself artistically, you do it privately rather than it becomes who you are. And so kind of separating them, the West, from us, the East, the Easterns, the Orientalists, whatever you want to call it, is I think is what keeps families and people, even if they don't actually follow the even if it's not religious or comes from a theological background. I think there's just like a political reason that really separates the us from them type of power dynamic.
I was going to say, I'm surprised. In some sense, I understand the controversy if the artwork that you wanted to put in the mosque had faces, because I know that the different debates around that. But generally speaking, mosques are full of artwork. Mosques are full of art. You know, they've got Islamic tiles. Even the carpet is a form of art. The pattern on the floor, everything. The calligraphy of Allah on the wall. So it seems like these people kind of sometimes they may not realize that some artwork, some things that are right in front of their eyes are actually forms of art. They're completely oblivious to that. So yeah,
that's the nature of biases, is you don't know you have them all the time, right?
And I think they represent, like, you know, having calligraphy or like the tiles and the carpets. These are Islamic art. It's like an Islamic art versus exactly. a painting, a portrait.
They're kind of like compartmentalized. It's like, that's like art. Oh, yeah. But this is just. Yeah. I mean, we want to be in a beautiful surrounding if we're going to be close to Allah, you know, like.
Yeah, and
Very
on
true.
that note, I'd like to mention that not this Ramadan, but the previous one, there was an art exhibition at Al-Azhar Mosque, and it hosted the artistic works. They were mainly calligraphy works of 50 countries, like artists from 50 countries from all over the world. And there were many other competitions relating to art, like when it comes to voices and poems and other forms of arts. And this was at Al-Azhar Mosque here in Cairo. And you all know.
Can you share it, Sam? Can you?
Yeah, this is what I'm trying to do now. Yeah, sure.
Do you know how to share on Zoom?
Yeah. I'm working on it now. So this is the point that I wanted to highlight. It was at Al-Azhar Mosque itself, and it was more of an art exhibition at Al-Azhar Mosque here in Cairo. Maybe it will take me time until I have the content ready to share. So if you may proceed until I find them, please.
Sure. Just while you sort that out, I wanted to ask Huda and Sama, obviously you've joined the call, maybe Yasmina as well, what your kind of interests are in art, if you have a personal interest in it, or if you have any particular opinions that you want to share on the subject.
I like arts. I like I'm bad at drawing and painting and things like that. I don't have talent, but I like to go to galleries and to exhibitions. But I do theater. I do drama work.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I used to go to a conference, international conference in Switzerland, and we do like we talk about specific topic, and then we work on it with different tools. So I used to write plays and act with other professional actors. I'm not professional, but I like this. So this is the only kind of art that I see myself do something and go and act.
Interesting. What kind of plays and theatre, like what's the theme generally?
Yeah, so the theme was refugees, and the last play, it was about stories of refugee women coming from escaping war in Sudan, and coming her journey through Libya, Italy, all these countries, France, and then coming to UK. And then from UK, we focused on how the British community is dealing with refugees. What are the challenges for refugees? What are the challenges for the British community in accepting these refugees? So generally, most of the theater things that I do is mainly about an issue that me as a social worker, I want to put focus on. So I believe that art is very strong in like spreading like the message, and I believe in art is very strong tool to work in the community. So this is what I do with art.
Interesting. Hopefully you can send us a link in on the chat so we can share it with everyone. I think that would be really cool. So
okay, I just need to get back and see where is it, because this was more than 2 years ago, but I have it in my archive, so I will send it to you.
Inshallah, cool, amazing.
Okay.
Thank you. Yasmina and Huda, yes, please tell us like your interests in art and so forth. I don't know which one of you wants to go first.
It's fine. So I'm also into arts, and actually my background is history and religious studies. I'm currently studying filmmaking in India, so filmmaking and film history.
Okay.
And I know, Faiza, we had an interview, so I sort of freelance write about Libyan artists. I'm mixed German-Libyan, and just saw like 5 minutes ago, just saw Faiza's story and just straight away jumped into the conversation.
And what motivated you, Yasmina, to get into it?
I think I was very interested in the perspectives that might be coming up in the discussion. I mean, right now, it's always very interesting to hear rather personal statements and individual ideas on these sort of approaches, because there's a lot of theory work on it, but theories of macro perspectives on it. And I thought it could be interesting because I've been following up de-orientalizing art for a bit. So yeah, I was interested in what would come.
And
otherwise, personally, otherwise, personally, I think I'm mostly interested. I look at artist resistance. So in India, I'm working with some sort of political film collectives. So particularly also for the case of Libya, being an artist is an act of resistance right now. So I think that is the main angle that I sort of follow up.
That's really interesting. Thank you for that. Huda. Do you have a mic? Maybe.
Oh, this is Hussam. I think Hussam is trying to show.
Okay, fine. Just while hang on 1 second, Hussam. Huda, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi. Hi. I'm sorry. I'm not an artist. I have been a journalist since 2011, and I have covered actually a few exhibitions when I was in Libya, from Najla Al-Ajali to and then mostly and then also Shawkat al-Fituri. At the time, I was amazed to see how you can create something when you are in a conflict zone. That's something that was a culture shock for me when I was in Libya. How can you be creative and get all this and show to the world that out of the destruction you can get something beautiful and creative. I remember I was in Benghazi in 2012, and I saw some of the works of Badil Wakwak. Also in Misrat as well, I saw some stuff. Some of the rebels were using those bullets, to write names of cities. So I've learned a little bit about some Libyan cities through some of those artwork. So that's something that I found quite amazing about Libyan artists and how they were able to make out of to make something beautiful out of the ugly. That's for Libya. I'm also I have been I've discovered also in 2016 another Libyan French artist, Hadia Ghanam, who did some art installation, and I found her work quite amazing as well. That she's been using stuff from remnants of the war like shrapnel and all that, and like she would make something out of that. On the Tunisian side, for instance, I have a friend of mine who is actually Tunisian Israeli Jewish, and he has been trying to highlight the Tunisian Jewish art to people, to Tunisian Jews on the diaspora, whether in France or the US or Canada or even Israel. And I found he was also using the same type of, the same technique as Hadia Ghana, art installation, through videos like, from synagogues, like, and all that. So that's something that I learned about, how art in conflict zone or in exile could, help people learn about your culture. So that's basically it.
That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. You're right that how accessible art is, that's one of the reasons why it's so powerful as a form of medium for like self-expression and communicating messages, because anyone can do it, whether you're rich or poor, everyone has access. So Hussam, you wanted to share something on your screen, yeah?
Yeah, I found some here. I found some on the internet here.
This is this artwork by your students, Hussam?
No, not mine. They are artists, and it was mainly about calligraphy.
And it had an Islamic theme, right?
Yeah, most predominantly. Yeah. Can you see the screen now?
Yes.
So you see how all the works are exhibited or put on display within the mosque itself.
Within a mosque, Shatha.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, but here's the thing. So while I salute this very much, it again there was a category that it needed to be met. The requirement that it would. I mean, all of the art is calligraphy, and it's because historically speaking, calligraphy is Islamic. It's a form of Islamic art. So if I was to bring abstract work or portrait work like Faiza's work that I have here, that is where the difficulty of showing artwork in the mosque, that at least in my experience with de-orientalizing art, I've faced. If I was to bring another, I have Rawan al-Muntasir, whose artwork is mostly calligraphy. If I were to bring her work into the mosque, maybe that would have been accepted, but not like Faiza's work that's very portrait based.
Very interesting. But then we have to talk about, by the way, Hussam, some of the calligraphy looks amazing. I was looking at one piece. It looked really nice, the kind of Kufic calligraphy. We have to ask ourselves, why was calligraphy such a popular form of art at that time in Islamic history? And perhaps if Islam emerged in a different geopolitical context, if another form of art would have been more popular. Just because, basically what I'm trying to say is, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because abstract art didn't exist at that time, it doesn't mean that abstract art is haram. We don't know if it would have been, if people would have employed abstract art, right?
Yeah, I see what you mean. I see what you mean. But the thing is, like, if I'm going to speak about the Islamic jurisprudence and the opinions within the Islamic jurisprudence, we need to remember that like when it comes to a place of worship, it has its own nature and it has its own purpose, because primarily it's a place of worship. So the idea of being selective, so it can be understood within the context of the purpose of this place. We understand from the Sunnah of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and definitely the Sunnah is one of the major sources of understanding the Islamic jurisprudence. And we read in the statements, traditions of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that there were those people who came from Abyssinia, and they were actually carrying out a display which included movements and moving their bodies. And how is it, even the wife of the Prophet, she was so keen to watch them, and this happened in the mosque itself. So the point that I'm trying to make here is the fact that we need to draw a distinction between the discursive practice of Muslims and how it evolved, and the interplay that happens with the culture sometimes, and Islam per se. And this is what is always missing in many works in academia, or when we address things from an academic perspective, that we need to draw this distinction between the practices of the people and the interplay of the culture when it comes to how they view even their own religion or their own faith traditions and the faith itself.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Hassan, I have a question. Around 4 months ago, I started doing research in comparative scripture, and obviously Quran and Hadith was one of my main focuses. And as I was doing the research, I realized that there's a divide between Muslim scholars in the Muslim world and Muslim scholars in the West, and the arguments that they bring and the research that they bring is not really in conversation with one another. So it seemed that there's two bodies of literature on the same topic, but there's no conversation, and hence in doing research, like how you know, this literature says, okay, dismiss that, and this literature says dismiss that, while they're all Muslim. How in the context, for example, in studying, for example, art, the relationship between art and religion, or I remember last time you said you have an issue with the term religion. So with art and theology, or with art and Islam, how can we fix the gap that exists between the bodies of literature that are not in conversation with one another, even though if they were to be in conversation with one another, maybe perhaps we have better answers to our questions?
Yeah, okay, so just to get it right, so you touched upon many points now, and the point of the literature and Muslim scholars and predominantly Muslim population countries and the West. So like, as to what you found this kind of disparity that seems to be irreconcilable. Can you tell me, like, exactly in your research what it was about, or
So
pertains to what exactly?
So for me, I saw that the disparity, that there was a gap in understanding scripture and the methodology used to understand scripture and examine it. So those who study, for example, I read, forgot this book, but it's the book has a body of literature by different scholars on Islamic scripture, and then somebody like, what's his name, Fadl Rahman. I think he's a scholar from Pakistan, if I'm not mistaken.
I know, yeah.
So he, in his book, he argued that, that book with all the, I mean, it was the things that I learned in that book of mainly made by German scholars, Austrian scholars, American scholars, Canadian scholars in Islamic scripture. But like the things that they were saying, for me, I've never heard of, discussing the Islamic scripture and Quran and whatnot. And then Fadl Rahman said, these people, I'm sorry for my whole language, but these people are full of BS. They don't know what they're talking about. These people are
what, sorry?
They said, like, these people are full of BS. They don't know what they're talking about. They come at it from an outside perspective, and they don't study it from within, while he was advocating for this studying. So this disparity is what I mainly saw.
Okay, so I see what you mean. Look, there is a saying even within the literature of the Muslim jurists. They say, ليس كل خلاف معتبر. Like, not every difference of opinion is well regarded. But the point is, there has to be foundations and grounds for a difference of opinion to be worthy of being considered. So what I'm saying here is, okay, of course, we respect and we appreciate every human endeavor, or every ijtihad, or every independent legal reasoning to understand the scripture or the sources of the jurisprudence. But the point is, and I would say that from my experience studying in the UK, I'm doing my master's in the UK and working as an imam in the States before, and my work at Al-Azhar Fatwa Global Center, there is a point that is missing in the minds of many academics, and that's within the literature, and I'm using the term that you used here, Shatha. There is a science called usul al-fiqh, or the principles or the sources of the Islamic jurisprudence, and this is where we find a clear methodology of how to approach a text, how to understand it, how to extract rulings from it. So with that being clear in mind, this notion that it is like two different, I see that also there are questions in the chat feature, so I need to focus, and then I can read the questions in the chat feature. So what I'm trying to say is, Islam is very rich intellectually, and this is why, for example, you find many ink spilled on usul al-fiqh, or the sources of jurisprudence, and always, even when it comes to, by the way, to Sunni schools of jurisprudence or Shia schools of jurisprudence, and I'm writing currently a paper to be published soon on this point, and how that there were always debates that contributed to the convergence even of the terms used by all Muslim scholars when it comes to usul al-fiqh, and how is it this convergence of opinions and these argumentations and these debates that even sometimes took place. I mean, debates in an academic sense, not in the negative sense of the word. So you find that they contributed to the crystallization of these terms. So I don't fully endorse the idea that you can find the two bodies and they are totally different when it comes to how to approach a divine or an authentic scripture that has its authority, or an authoritative scripture. I don't see this point, because there is a science that deals with this, and for any opinion that needs to come up with something new, it has to be based on these foundations, as is the case with any discipline, as is the case with any science. For any contribution to be worthwhile, to be viable, it has to take into consideration these foundations and these maxims and these principles. But to come and with all the like due respect to something like deconstructivism, I have like issues with this and many other academics, and we can talk about this, but this is another like big topic for debate.
So if I may ask, if I may kind of orient this conversation into like the art, into art, then how can art be used as a tool of expressing to express religious identity, if you may, or religious views or opinions artistically, if it does not follow this conventional form of art in the Islamic context of calligraphy? How can we kind of what's the word, like that boundary that how can we break it and then use art as a language that we can speak about these things outside the conventional form of expression?
This question is to me or
no, to everybody. No, everyone.
Yeah. Okay, because I'd like to give the floor to others as well. I have a say to express on this point, but I don't want like to seem as if I am dominating the whole conversation.
Could I respond, Hassan?
Sure, please.
Yes.
Sure. After you've responded, Sean, I'd like to hear, because Khulud hasn't, obviously she hasn't participated much, so I would like to hear her opinion on this as well. So yeah, please, Sean, go ahead, and then we'll go to Khulud next.
Okay, Jazakallah. From what I understand of what Hassan was saying, I think he was just making a general point how it's very good to talk about the right to free expression within the space of the mosque or of worship, but we should, I don't think anyone would question this, but there are certain parameters that are within the kind of classical structure of the religion in terms of not having portraits and things like that. I absolutely agree that they shouldn't restrict themselves to calligraphy. I think there'd be nothing wrong with having landscapes in terms of, but then I believe I've seen this in a lot of mosques. I from what I can, just off the top of my head, I would say I've seen photography, perhaps of Medina or Mecca, of other religious sites, even painting sometimes with these sorts of sites. And yeah, I think people could be more open-minded, but if you're asking them to go beyond that and to suddenly challenge maybe the prevailing opinion, I think there'd be a lot of other work that would need doing, and not necessarily work that should be done in order to make a mosque open-minded about having portraits and things like that. But just to say one other thing, I think in terms of them restricting the art they have in the mosque, this is from me speaking from personal experience, but I recently, a few months ago, was in talks with a man, his name was Faisal, who he ran a radio station called Ramadan Radio, and it's across Slough. And I think this was quite illuminative in that I was talking to him about having a podcast discussing the issue of Palestine, and if you want to include that under kind of the umbrella of art in terms of having an open discussion and debate. And he said that he would face problems because whenever they talk about things that aren't, he was open to the idea, but he said they would potentially face issues because every time they talked about something that wasn't explicitly religious or very traditionally religious, that like foreign policy, for instance, like if you were to talk about political issues, then they would face a lot of scrutiny. I think we have to look at the political atmosphere again. Don't want to always bring it back to this, but Angie made the point earlier that it's sometimes the fear of the artist or the fear that the artists themselves are experiencing in face of in light of their kind of political reality, that restricts their art. It's not necessarily a religious motivation that causes people to self-censor. They said that the person, Faisal, who the person I was talking to, said that it could be prevent all manner of kind of government bodies that might take away his license if he was seen to be doing anything kind of controversial. And if you look at the current political situation in the US, I mean, there are famous comedians and someone who, even in this supposed liberal democracy, faced a lot of pushback from the Trump White House. And if you look at the Egyptian Revolution, I can't remember the name of the individual, but you guys, one of you probably will remember. But there was this very famous...
Be careful, because Hossam's in Egypt, so...
But there was this very famous satirist, I've forgotten his name. He was, I think, one of the biggest kind of public personalities in Egypt at the time. And I remember him facing a lot of pushback from kind of the government under Morsi. Does that ring any bells, Assal?
That's it, yeah. So, Khulud, in terms of your artwork, linking this in with, you know, accessibility for Muslims, I know you've mentioned that you do art workshops with young Muslim children. Can you tell us more about it? I'm sharing it right now. Yeah, explain.
Yeah, just one second about the comedian. Was it Bassem Youssef? The comedian?
Yes, I believe it was Bassem Youssef.
Yeah,
yes,
that's what I thought.
Yeah.
I was like, I think it was a bigger name.
Sorry.
Yeah, he was a major figure in Egypt for a time.
Yeah, and he's here now. He's in the States. Yeah, so as far as the kids, you know, what you're looking at here, I try to do a little bit of religion, but not too much. I just kind of show them enough from different aspects. So for example, you know, there's the Persian sun catcher. We'll talk about the Persian culture, and that piece itself is from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's from Iran, and it was from an important building. If you scroll down, just to give you some examples, we don't have to go through, I think you have to go back. And I don't really do, I don't try to concentrate too much on Islam on my website itself, even though, like, if I talk about, you know, like this one over here on the left, the Katham, you know, the piece that I showed earlier, which has the 8 points, which is so easy to teach kids, because it's basically two squares offset each other, and kids can make that so easy. And then when you tell them, oh, it's a pattern, and you do this, and then you show them how it's, you know, on the walls of mosques, and then you start bringing in Escher and all that kind of stuff, they get really excited about what lines can create. And then if you go back, I think I pull up, I love the Katham. The Katham is just so easy with kids. But see, I do even stuff like Islam, the 5 pillars. But if you go down, I also do stuff like about Christmas, you know, because I'm trying to show the variety of this world that we live in. We do I have to say, I don't do Jewish religion because they use Hebrew. And so I do Arabic because, you know, the Christians use, you know, Arabic at Christmas. So they say, you know, Arabic words. But I do all of these things, you know, it's like books on Eid al-Adha, maybe caking cake pox. There's a Libyan egg carton. I mean, made out of egg carton. But in the meantime, the kids are learning about the flag. They're learning about the culture. So I'm trying to get them young. I'm trying to get them, you know, trying to put the glue sticks in their hand very early. And then as they're, you know, gluing down this stuff and playing with this stuff, maybe you teach them a little bit about, you know, scroll down, like I think the cardboard home telescope is a brand new book that had come out from, I want to say,
I missed it. Have I gone past it?
Yeah, I think it's further. No, it's cardboard home telescope right there. But then it's like, you know, the Iqra, you know, Baba, telling them what Baba means. So the website really it's a free resource. Everything on it is free. Alhamdulillah, I am able to provide for the money to pay for the resources for the website when I do ads, and, you know, all these different types of money to pay for it. So I am able to make it free. And so any parent can go in and type anything, you know, the Allah glass, they'll learn about Allah, they'll learn about Eid. Sorry, I seem to have gone through a whole Eid section here. But you know, the Bismillah round placement, we learn about Bismillah, we learn about how we use it. But in the meantime, the kids are using scissors to cut. Because not very many parents will put scissors in kids' hands, which drives me crazy when I teach art and I've got second graders and you have to spend part of the class teaching them how to use scissors. It's like, you know, give kids scissors.
I completely
The kids X-Acto
agree.
way before. But anyway, so yeah, you see more Cathans.
What is this called?
I do a camp in my house and in my community for kids, and I take a dozen kids and we bring them over and we do all of the activities with them. And at the same time, we talk about all the different countries, all the different religions, you know, all the different areas that are in that, in our beautiful countries.
Have you noticed that people's attitudes began to change towards art while you were doing it? Like, were the family?
It really depends. You know, it's so funny because sometimes I'll put up something Christmas and then the Muslims are like, why are you doing Christmas? I'm like, you know, it's not a crafty Muslim, it's a crafty Arab. There are tons of Muslim only sites that spend a lot of money going into really amazing details about what the surahs mean, what this is for, and what is that. And I don't want to do that. I'm like trying to skirt the surface for teachers to be comfortable. And I had a teacher on Instagram send me their photos that they took one of my painting lessons and did an entire lesson plan about it. And to me, that's like the biggest thrill, that this teacher was sitting there talking about, you know, Islamic art with kids and showing them different Cathans and showing them different mosques, because that wouldn't be something that teacher would have maybe looked for 5-10 years down the line. So I am proud of that. I am proud that I have that resource out there, but there's definitely pushback. You know, I mean, I did, the most famous one is Libya, of course. Naji al-Nabi. I did the candle, you know, with the fingers with the candles, and people are a little upset about that because that was due Christmas. So it's like, you know, you try to show everything. This is what some people celebrate. You know, some people in Turkey dance in circles, and that's part of it too. So you just try to show them everything, and you realize that along the line, you just can't please everybody.
Do you notice differences depending on the type of country? Like, obviously, to generalize, obviously there's differences in every country, but if you were to generalize, do you notice more pushback from a specific Arab demographic more than another?
Not really pushback. I do have, not really, I wouldn't say favorite countries, but I do have countries that if I post about it, the people from that country are definitely much more like, oh, sharing, and look what, you know, this is what my flag looks like, or this is what, you know, of course, the one that is always the most popular is Palestine, because anything you do Palestinian people love sharing their flag. So any kind of post, you know, they'll share about that. So it really just depends on how I reach people. The whole business is me, myself, and I. Horrible marketer. I really am. So am I finding, like if I put a post up, am I finding the Palestinians? Am I finding Libyans? Am I finding the Arab Christians? But I really just kind of throw it out there and just kind of see what people react to. And that's the same with my art. It's all, if you want to flip over to the other link I sent you, I do very reactionary art. For example, this one piece, I'm sorry about the glare, but it's in glass. It says Inshallah, and it's in Arabic calligraphy. And I did it in reaction when that guy was thrown off the plane for saying it on his phone to his uncle. And I wanted to give the word power, so I put it around red. And I put it in an art show, and people went nuts over it. They're like, what is that? What does it say? And what is it? So then you have to sit back and explain the meaning behind the piece, which then brings up a whole conversation about who's allowed on the planes and what they're allowed to say and what they're allowed to have on their t-shirts. I did a piece for the whirling dervish. He's really hard to see because he's in white. I'm so sorry, but I don't know if you can get him. And again, it was, yeah, I have pictures of him. I'll try to put him up. It was another piece that people were like, oh, it's a dancing person. Why are you putting dancing people? I'm like, well, you know, if you go to Turkey, you really can't avoid them. They're kind of everywhere. And they're part of Islam. And so that brings up a whole, you know, other conversation. Putting the word Allah in various forms and asking people to find them. I think this one is actually on the website. This is the blue one. Putting, you know, the word Allah, hiding it, not hiding it, but just kind of making it a part of the artwork. That's the blue one up there, yeah. Making it a part of the artwork that then it's hidden, but then people have to really kind of look for it, which is really kind of the whole point of religion, of really finding, you know, your own religion. It just kind of looks like a circle to people, right? You don't even know what it is. But I would say one of my most controversial pieces was a piece, actually I had it in a gallery in Seattle. And the Seattle, it's a co-op that I belong to. Unfortunately, I don't have it on this. This is a, Al-Azhar was a show that I did last December. This is a show I did last, I think it was March. And this is a gallery of African artists. And so I and one other Tunisian are the only North Africans in the gallery. There's 300 artists. So the artwork is predominantly very African. And so when they are always asking me, you know, bring Arabic, bring Arabic into our gallery, bring Arabic into the artwork, because it's definitely missing. So after Trump decided that my country was called shithole, I decided that I would take the power back from him, and that I would put the power back in Africa. And so I created this piece. The whole thing is Africa, but if you can see it, it's supposed to be grain, like, you know, a whole field of grain.
Yeah, yeah. That's really.
And it's all about the power of Africa and how we've used Africa. We've taken its people, we've taken its food, we've taken everything from it. After we take everything from it, we still label it with this horrible, horrible name, right? Like, we abuse it, we take everything from it. It's still incredibly gorgeous. However, when the shitholer is gone, the word is gone too, because the power of the grain is more powerful than the word. And the grain will be here much, much longer than he will be, and he will be long gone. This is for the Libyans, of course. We've, you know, had our little sewer moment. We'd like to replicate it. And so this is probably one of the pieces that has brought the most conversation. And I think it had a lot to do with the fact that it was in this African space, and it created this whole conversation with African Americans. And as I don't know if everybody heard mention, I live in Seattle, which is predominantly white. There's very few African Americans. And so that started a whole other conversation, you know, about the power of words, the power of specifically of Arabic words and the origin of them and how long they've been a part of society.
Khulud, I was just going to ask you, do you typically find Libyan audiences to be more conservative?
The Libyan audience, I haven't really found, to be honest with you. In Seattle, there are very, very few of them. When they do, you know, you find out about a show or something, but they will definitely be supportive. But let's be honest, half of them are related somehow. So, you know, they do come out and are supportive. But no, the audience tends to be very international. Like the exhibit here that I had at Susan Bar, where I had these 6 pieces that are up on the screen, was on Mercer Island. And Mercer Island in Seattle is predominantly Jewish. They have one of the highest concentration of synagogues in Seattle. And so that was that audience that came out to that. And so that was pretty interesting talking.
Did they relate to it? Did they relate to it as a Jewish audience?
To the 2 lower pieces, yeah. Of course, the geometric pieces is very prominent in a lot of architecture in the area. Those pieces. But the Arabic writing, the white pieces, definitely intrigues people. Those 2 pieces sold right away. And it's just fascinating to me that it's such a simple word. The word is simple. The artwork, of course, took me like a couple of weeks to try to figure out. But such a simple word would mean so much. And then, of course, the piece has a deeper meaning because you're trying to find peace, and you're not only trying to find it white on white, but you can't find it whole because the inside of the last letter is missing. So you'll never be able to find it whole.
Okay.
So there's all these, different inner meanings that are layers, I would say, that are to my art. And people have to remember they're tiny. They're little tiny pieces, except for the Africa one. So people have to get super close to them to be able to see little tiny dots that are added. And I do that on purpose because I want people to get up and close to them. I want them to really be a part of seeing it, not just, oh, this is lovely, from afar.
That's really interesting. Okay, so I have a question, and then I'm going to shut up and let everyone else kind of nitpick everyone. So I noticed that yourself and Faiza as well, when you talk about African art, you talk about it separately to Libyan art. And that is really interesting because as a North African myself, I do feel like I have both identities, like the whole, obviously I don't identify as Black, I identify as North African, but the whole kind of Black Lives Matter movement at the moment resonates with me to some extent. And also when I look at African art or post-colonial art, for example, Faiza's artwork, which is about Black identity and African identity, that does resonate with me. So I wanted to ask you, like, if yourself and Faiza, do you see a distinction between your Libyan, like your Arab identity and your African identity, or do you think it's the same thing?
For sure, 100%. I mean, I got my master's in international studies specifically on African art. And I studied the different, my thesis was all about the differences between West African art and North African art. Mm-hmm. And the similarities, of course, because you do have, the art used as protection in between the two. But I think, and I'll let Faiza, of course, follow up with this, but I think also for Libyans and a lot of maybe other Arabs in the region, we don't really have a lot of conversations about art. We don't have like our art history. We don't really know who the artists were that were great before us, but yet we can name off Picasso, Moreau, all Kandinsky, all these amazing artists. And then you ask people to name 5, artists that they knew in history, art history, and some of them, would be very hard pressed. We don't value museums. We don't value even going to the mosques and seeing the beautiful calligraphy. We don't make it a family event. We don't say, let's all go. The museums here have family days. So I think by that, it's free family days at that, where you can take the family of 6 into a museum for free, which is amazing considering the cost behind that for, somebody in an Arab country. But I think that's really what's missing, having the art history and having who was here before us and what they've done. And with African art, you have it. You can go to all the different countries because most of them were looted And people came out and they said, this is a mask and it was used for this exactly, and this is how they used it in this ceremony. And they wrote all that down. So you have this sense of that history in African art, of course not in contemporary African art, but you have that sense of history that part of that art was ingrained and has been part of conversations. But North African art has not been part of conversations. And I think that makes it a little harder to not harder, but to really kind of make sure that there is that distinction, because we are missing that history.
So it's not, so in your opinion, it's not the artwork per se that's the difference, but it's the level of discussion and engagement around it. Well, obviously you do identify differences between West African and North African.
Oh yeah, there's, I mean, the artwork for sure is different. I mean, artists in Libya would definitely have different things that they need to get out than an artist in Nigeria. So the conversation would definitely be different. But I think, yeah, it's a hard question. I need like 4 more hours.
Yeah, Shatha, please.
I mean, this touches on what we talked about last Friday in our conversation about politicized identities. You know, like at least in the context of Libya, it was part of the national strategy to mobilize an Arab identity and just strengthen that Arab identity, and then that was switched into strengthening an African identity, and that's why Gaddafi became like the king of Africa and I don't know what. So I remember when I left and I was 16 years old on my own to Canada, and I remember I had a girl from Zimbabwe said, "Hey Shatha, come, we're gonna have an African meeting," and I said, "Okay, why are you telling me?" Because at that time, I'm like, I never thought of myself as African. I'm not even a Maziriya, so like I'm Arab, supposedly. And so she said, come to the African meeting. And I said, okay, I'm not African. She's like, aren't you Libyan? And I said, yeah. And so like, therefore, and it was then that I realized my identity has politicized way too much, because we want to, and that's colonialism as well, the legacy of it, that I did not want to identify as African, even though I was African and I am African. But there is, and even when saying African, I have to emphasize, I'm not only African, I'm North African. Like there is, and I definitely do recognize the difference of cultures, but even the culture of South Africa and Swaziland are extremely different, but they don't mind saying we're Africans, the Swazis and the South Africans. But like in North Africa, there's more complex political identities that must be explored further in order to answer why is it that we make a distinction between Libyan identity and African identity. And I think probably, at least in the Libyan context, the movement, and that's what Khulud kind of was talking about, the need to explore the history. There's been a lot of movement of civilizations and identities that have lived throughout North Africa. And for me, I always tell my parents, I'm like, my last name is Sbeta, like that's not Arabic and that's not a Maziri. What is that? Like, and my mom's last name is Turki, and I'm like, that's Turkish. Who am I? Like, where am I from? And so there's a lot of movement to kind of examine.
Maybe from Egypt.
Maybe, I gotta do my ancestry test to find out. But it's just like this movement makes it a little more complicated, beautiful, fluid and beautiful, but yet complex, that must be examined a little more and explored a little more. That's what I think. I'm not an artist, so I can't speak on behalf of art.
Faiza, I think you wanted to say something. I think her mic was coming on and off. Maybe she has.
She's also saying that there's electricity cuts and issues with it.
Fine. Okay. Maybe when she fixes her mic or types up. So yeah, I get what you're saying, Shatha, and it's a difficult one. Me and Sean were discussing this the other day, because basically there's this Algerian lady called Malia Bouatia, and she was the first head of the National Union of Students that was black, that identified as black, but she was Amazighi and white and North African. And I found it a bit problematic, because I didn't like the fact that she decided to kind of identify as Black, even though we have, as North Africans, as fairer skinned North Africans, for lack of a better expression, we have some privileges that other Africans don't have. And I don't think it's fair for her to kind of wear this jumper and take it on and off as it suits her. You know, I identify as Black to become the first person to do X, Y, or Z, but then you're not facing the injustices that Black Africans face on a daily basis. For example, like, you know, in Morocco, West African migrants at the moment struggle with, they don't get the same salary in the workplace. They may struggle to marry Amazigh or Arab partners because of family, you know, prejudices and whatever. So we have privilege. That's why I find this conversation very difficult, because yes, I do recognize that as North Africans, we do have a partial Black African ancestry. I'm sure like all of us have some West African blood in us, but at the same time, we're part of this complex dynamic where historically Arabs and Amazigh in North Africa have also oppressed Black people. So it's a tricky one, isn't it?
I agree with you.
Morocco, I think, because we went to Morocco last year I took a group of Americans actually on a museum and culinary tour. We were supposed to go again in March, and it was of course canceled. Walking around with Americans and trying to show them that this, you know, Arab country had so many different religions. You know, one of the days we had a tour in a synagogue, and then we were in Tangier, and we'd gone to one of the Catholic churches, and then the call to prayer came out, and people were just standing there just amazed. They're like that's all three, you know. And so, but in Morocco too, what I thought was really amazing, especially in Rabat, it blew me away, was the number of murals and that whole part of bringing the art to the people.
Yeah.
They are everywhere. And you can do walking tours. They're across from the souk. They're up in the modern areas of town. I mean, there are buildings that I'm just shocked they haven't covered yet, but just lists and lists and lists of them. And I think, I mean, yes, for all the problems that the monarchy has, I don't want to get in trouble. We've already gotten in trouble with Egypt. You know, the thoughts of having that a monarchy. One thing I will say in Morocco that I was really impressed with was the amount of art that was brought to the streets.
No, I agree with what you're saying. In Morocco, we have very different forms of artistic expression. So a lot of our music is very diverse. We have Gnawa music. Gnawa or Gnawi is, you know it, Angie, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that literally means Black or of Black heritage. I think in like Amazigh dialect. Correct me if I'm wrong about this, but so we have Black African music, and then we have North African, like Arab music, Rai music, which is about political injustice, like by Cheb Khaled and Cheb Mami, and other Algerian singers have influenced us on that. And same with
even
the
outside, like gallery owners, you know, Souria, there's this gallery French guy that went in and opened a gallery, and he opened a whole other world into the French galleries. In Marrakesh, it was, you know, the famous painter. So having that connection to the outside world and bringing artists in and bringing artists out really brings, I mean, African, you know, North African, all these other places. It was such an amazing country. Yeah.
I agree. It's an overlap. It's like Yves Saint Laurent had his, you know, he set up Jardin Majorelle there. There's a history. He's Algerian as well. He was raised there. There is a huge artistic tradition, definitely. There's two things in the chat. Emma wanted to make a point, and I think Lawrence had a question for Sama about her African identity. So I don't know which one of you wants to go first. Maybe Lawrence first, and then Emma. Hello.
Hi. Hello. Hi. Yes. Well, actually, originally the question came from Osama. Was about, but I think in a sense it's been covered already. But it'd be interesting to get Sama's perspective on the dichotomy between people with conjoint Arab and African identities. So it could be both Maghreb, or it could be in the Sudanese context. And secondly, I asked Osama, and in the chat room, she's given interesting answers, but maybe she could make it public, which is about the role of art in the Sudanese revolution or uprising recently? What role did it play? That'd be really, I think, interesting to hear. Is Samah, are you there? Yes.
Yes. So the thing about the Arab African identity in Sudan is very, very sensitive issue because of the of politics, actually. Because the previous government, the dictatorship in Sudan, which continued for nearly 30 years and tortured people, they were like more going to extremist Islamic Arabic direction. So this made people, they are really like many people in Sudan, unwilling to be defined as Arab, actually. And now in Sudan, there is a big movement calling for taking Sudan out of the Arab League. And also there is another issues like Darfur issues, which are and there is some racism from the northern people of Sudan against the southern and western and Darfurian people, and this was supported by the government. So it's not a lot of people now in Sudan, they like the idea of being Arab, actually, and this is a very sad thing. But at the same time, like it's like we can see now many of Arab countries they are supporting the military side of the current government, and they were supporting Omar al-Bashir, the previous government. So people in Sudan, they're not very happy with the Arab countries. So it's a very sensitive issue. And most of the people, they just identify that we speak Arabic, but it's just we are Arab because we speak Arabic, and this language was kind of forced because we speak many other languages. Like, for example, I'm from a Nubian background, but I don't speak Nubian language because the government forced people to speak Arabic. So it's a very sensitive thing there. Yeah, so Lawrence asked me about the role of arts in the Sudanese revolution. Actually, it's a very interesting thing because the art took a very core and basic part in the Sudanese revolution. In the beginning of the revolution, it was difficult for people to organize. So artists and people, they used, they designed the leaflets and the callings for the demonstration. And so just a group of young people and people, they just take this from the artist and they just walk normally in the street and they just like throw it like over your wall and in your car and things like that. And yeah, so then after that, people started painting outside of the walls and painting things and writing things. And also then people went to out at night outside the houses of people who are working with the regime and the previous regime and the military, and they were writing outside on the house walls like, we know you, you are going to fall, and this and this and that. So, and then after that, in the big famous sitting in Khartoum, the artists, they have like they had a big tent and they had 2 stages there, and now we have lots of songs that remind people with the revolution, because they used to motivate people to go. And when there were clashes with the army and with the police, and for people who got killed, so it's a very rich kind of art connected to the revolution.
That's really interesting. No, I think you touched on, unfortunately, because we're running out of time, it would have been really good to have the discussion that you mentioned, which is the role of art in propaganda. So for example, in the leaflets in Sudan, that may have changed the dynamic and discourse of the revolution. Historically, art has always been a very useful propaganda. Well, I say useful, but sometimes it's been used for the wrong reasons. For example, if you look at Nazi Germany and their use of artwork in their propaganda and their anti-Semitic leaflets as well. So art can be powerful, but it can be misused as well, right? Maybe did you feel like in Sudan it was misused to some extent in the revolution, in terms of like the kind of narratives or propaganda leaflets that were circulated, or did you agree with most of it? Or
no, actually, I don't feel it got misused, but I feel if we didn't have art, maybe we would have taken longer time in the revolution to succeed.
Yeah.
Because the art which was there encouraged everyone, even people who don't know how to draw or how to write or how to do things. They were encouraged to participate in everything, and even the citizens, they got to drag the people in the army with art to be in solidarity with the revolution, because people at night in the sitting, they were singing, and then they got some people from the army who had talent.
Yeah.
And then they came, they sang songs. Even the previous regime, they tried to do some songs and some art just to confront this, but they didn't succeed.
I have 2 more questions, and then I think Emma wanted to ask something, and then perhaps we should wrap up after we discuss Emma's point. So my first question is, did you agree with the split in Sudan? It's a tough question. It's a very big question. And the second question is, as a Nubian, do you also identify as Arab? Or like, do you see Arab identity as ethnicity or culture, language, or kind of a combination of the two? So these are my 2 questions.
Okay. I'm not very happy with the split of my country, because I don't believe in like splitting and separation. But at the same time, I'm happy for the people in Sudan, in South Sudan, because I could see how people in Northern Sudan, they were dealing with them, and how the government didn't give them chance like to go and to get places in the government. Like they couldn't run for presidency because there is a law, a special law for that. So why I'm a citizen, but I don't have the all right like everyone. And also sometimes I think like the countries and the borders in Africa is not something that is done by Africans. So it was just a mix, and you find like some tribes, they should be a country or something, and then they are mixed with another place. So I'm happy for my brothers and sisters in South Sudan, because the most important thing for me is that people to be treated as humans, and they get all the right, regardless if they should be in my country or not. The second thing, the Arab identity. So I'm from Nubian background, but also I have Arab blood as well. So my great grandfather, he came down from the Nubian Sudan, in North Sudan, to where we live now, in northern Khartoum. So I'm mixed. I have a mix. But really, I feel like Arab is culture. I don't see myself as Arab actually, but I see myself in the Arabic culture. I see myself African actually. I don't see
Interesting.
myself as Arab, but it is my culture. I love Arabic. I love the classic Arabic poems. My mother is the Arabic language teacher.
Interesting. Yeah, Angie, sorry, can you hear me? Yeah. Is this the same for you, Angie? Is it like, do you, because I know someone mentioned in the chat, Khulud was mentioning in the chat that sometimes, I think it was Khulud, that sometimes Lebanese don't identify as Arab. How do you feel about this with your Druze? So is Druze identity partly linked with ethnicity and culture as well? Because I know that there is some kind, there is a lineage about being a Druze as well, right? In terms of who you can marry, who you can't. Do you identify as Arab yourself, or is it slightly?
Yeah, I definitely identify as Arab. Like some Lebanese, there are some that are so attached to like being European that they're like, oh, I'm French. Which I'm like, no, you're not, sorry, but hate to break it to you.
Like Moroccan.
And then there are many that are like, oh, we're not Arab, we're Phoenician, you know, or like the Canaan was the indigenous. So like, I would understand that, like, for example, with the Amazigh in North Africa, like the communities and languages and attire, like everything from the Amazigh, I feel like still exists and is still alive. Whereas in Lebanon, like nobody speaks Phoenician, like nobody you know, like there's no like Phoenician folklore. We speak Arabic. Our music is, you know, follows like Arabic maqamat and whatever. Like I feel like the culture and everything, at least at this point, is like Arab. There's nothing else. So to try to like connect to some, like especially when they just because they were occupied by the French, like everywhere that has been occupied, like obviously it's French is integrated in some way, but just from what I've seen and being Lebanese myself, I feel like so many like they want to be French instead of what they are. Like I feel like the brainwash is so deep. Specifically regarding the Druze community, like I do find that the French identity is usually the Christian population in Lebanon that are like that. Druze, at least all the ones that I've ever spoken to, like we tend to identify as Arab, but at the same time, like because there's no conversion into the Druze sect, it becomes almost like a race in and of itself. So there are some that are like, I'm not Arab, I'm Druze, and I'm like, again, like that doesn't make oh yeah, the Druze identity in Israel, but yeah, so there is that kind of like split. But I do find that Christians more often are like, no, like we're Phoenician or like French. Yeah, I personally identify also as Arab, and even the Druze community originated in Egypt. It was started by an Egyptian guy and this like Persian guy.
I didn't know that. Can you
Yeah, it originated in Cairo, actually, which is probably where my hair comes from.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that. It seems really similar. The situation with Druze seems kind of similar with the Jewish situation, where it's kind of semi-cultural, semi-religious, semi-ethnic, you know?
No, definitely, yeah. And I'm seeing, yeah, like even so Druze, like all across. I do find that the Druze that are in Israel / occupied Palestine, like the ones that are in the Golan Heights, they're like, no, we're Syrian, we're Druze. The ones that are in more like the Palestinian areas, I do believe that part of it's just for survival purposes. They're like, we're not Arab, but again, that's a whole other can of beans to discuss. Everyone's like,
we're going to discuss this next week. We have a call on.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, we can discuss it next week for sure. It would just take too much time.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. We're definitely going to take a note of that, about if kind of these minority group identity is part of a kind of evolutionary thing or a survival. Yeah.
So just a quick note on all these interesting perspectives, especially when it comes to identity and what shapes one's identity. You know, because by the end of the day, even academically speaking, identity is a construct, and it comes under the influence of many factors. One of them even is the social engineering of how identity is shaped. And this is why, from my perspective, being born in Egypt, which is part of Africa, and still with Arabic, I don't see a contradiction in belonging to all of these circles, or even if I may say spheres. So I don't see a contradiction between being Egyptian, being African, being Arab, speaking English, speaking Spanish, being a global citizen. So they don't have to be contradictory to each other, or it has to be only one to the exclusion of the others. Like, because of the point that Khulud mentioned, that some people would come up to her and they would challenge her way of presenting the Arab countries. So this is my perspective on this, and I would love to also to listen to your thoughts on this. Does it have to be like a sole factor, identity, or it can be open to more than one circle and more than one sphere?
Emir?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, so as I was saying before, like sometimes I don't feel comfortable like identifying as African, because I kind of feel like I don't have a right to, if that makes sense. Because like I sort of associate it with like a struggle, and a lot of African countries had to face slavery, and obviously Arab countries didn't like as much. I think they did a bit, but I'm not really sure about the history of that. But yeah, so I don't always feel comfortable, and I don't know, maybe I don't realize, but maybe it's also sort of like a privilege thing, because I remember like the one time I told someone I was African, like in secondary school, they're like, oh, what tribe do you come from? So I think maybe if people put themselves out as African more, they'd get more sort of hate. Maybe it's a privilege thing as well, but I don't know, I don't really necessarily think of that, but I don't know.
Interesting. Shatha, do you have any opinion on this?
Yeah, I definitely see parallels to that type of identification, playing the card, like for example, choosing what card I could play and what that could get me. So for example, and my brother, right, my brother came to the US in 2014. I came before him, but he came, 2014 hasn't been like, it's recent. So when he was writing his personal statements for colleges this year, he was saying like, oh, as a Libyan American, or like talked about like, so you use the identity of being Libyan and then living in America, the identity of being a migrant into the US. So like these identities to create a story. It is a true story. It is his story, but there's definitely a card that like we can use to get certain things. Like if it's for me, for example, if it's important that I play I could choose. I could play my Libyan card, or I can just pass by and not use my Libyan card. And that's I think what Amal is saying. For example, if I want to identify with the African community, I could choose to say, well, I'm African, I'm from Libya. Or I could say, well, I'm Arab, I'm from Libya. Or I could say, I'm Caucasian because I'm North African. So like there's so many cards that, and that's what privilege is the ability to pick and choose what card that best that can benefit you most in different situations.
Right.
And that's why I think that's what Amal is trying to say, is that the feeling uncomfortable to identify with a particular group of people, even though it is true that you can, but just that card of saying identify with that group just because it benefits me in that context.
Yeah, and it reminds me when I was in the UK, at the university, I would attend all the events by the different societies, be it the African Society, be it the Arab Society, be it whatever.
Yeah. No, you're so right, Shatha. You know, this is the problem I have with political blackness, people that identify as black politically, because black people cannot choose to no longer be, like, they can't turn off the switch to not be black tomorrow and not face oppression or not face a racist remark or being looked at weirdly, having their name scrutinized on a CV. Whereas a North African, a white North African that might want to play off the black card can choose to do that and tomorrow can opt out of that and not face the problems that black people face. It's totally a form of privilege.
We do have to do a group picture though, please.
Okay, fine. Right? Yeah. Who's got a screenshot tool? Do you want to do? I can see Angie sorting her hair.
And all the girls.
The floof is looking right, you know.
Does you want to give Yaz or Mohammed or anyone you guys want to come on for a second to do a group shot for?
Do you have a cyber comb that I can just?
Here.
I'm gonna floof you a little bit.
Oh yeah.
Let me get the snipping tool. I'll take a shot and you take
I think the bottom guys are maybe muted or okay. Here we go. Everybody.
Bye.
1, 2, 3. Zibna. All right.
Nice one. Thank you very much.
1 second to make sure it worked, and then otherwise we have to do a redo, and it's easier to have you guys all here while I do that.
Sure.
Yeah, it worked. Woohoo!
You introduced me to Hassan Hajjaj. I'll be interested.
Oh yeah, I'll get right on that.
Okay, thank you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Osama.
Thank you.
Really
So nice meeting you all.
You too.
Sharafna.
Likewise.
No, shut up.